So I want to start with a letter that you recently wrote to the governor about unemployment insurance, and especially the fact that we have a large debt now when it comes to the UI trust fund after months of claims that we didn't expect. And that will come back on the business community unless something is done about it. So you've asked for him to use CARES Act funding. So talk a little bit about that, and have you heard anything from the administration on that issue yet?
Well, let me say the reason I wrote the letter, it was triggered by the fact that you, the chamber, had written a letter to the governor talking about the unemployment insurance, which we call UI. Because of this is very similar to what occurred back in 2006, 7, somewhere around in that area, that we borrowed a substantial amount of money because of an unprecedented amount of claims. That came back on either an assessment or surcharge on the businesses, and it took us about 10 years to pay it back. What's critical about that now is that we are in a much more fragile situation with our businesses today. And to put additional pressures on them by assessments or surcharges, even if they haven't had unemployment insurance claims, because it's going to be across the board, be very difficult for many businesses to endure that type of pressure. And what I'm afraid of, it'll basically be that final straw that breaks their camel's back and put them out of business. So with that, if they're not in business, they're not selling, we're not generating sales tax. If they're not employing, we're not generating income tax. And it just becomes a downward cycle of we're going to be $1 billion shortfall, but with the more people out of work, the less taxes being generated from both sales tax and income tax. It's going to make it harder to fund the school systems, the social services, the jails, public protection. So that's why when I was waiting, but was going to wait a little while longer, when the chamber wrote their letter, I felt incumbent to follow it. Similar letter discussing the problem and why I think it is imperative for us to come up with a solution.
So has the administration said anything to you in response? I know that at a press conference recently, in terms of the chamber letter, he said, maybe we'll think about it. It depends on how the money goes and if we get more assistance from the federal government. But if he doesn't put this CARES money toward the UI trust fund, then what do we do? I know back towards the recession, we had a task force that worked on a couple things and we were able to get out of that hole. But what do you see as solutions if we don't use that CARES Act funding?
Well, let's talk about what's helping stabilize our budget. And that is an artificial stabilization by all the CARES money to PPP, and the additional or supplemental UI from the federal level. So we're getting income tax off of the withholding components of that. You know, we can't consistently rely on that because the federal government can't continue to print money. So what we have to do is get our economy, our businesses, Main Street, Kentucky back open to where we are building our base back, getting those revenues. So if we don't, then we're going to be sitting here at a point in time in Kentucky where the federal government will be forced, just because of their economics, to stop artificially keeping state governments and state economies afloat. So that's going to be extremely hard. And so the best way to generate tax revenues is to get businesses back up and running. And so I hope that answers your question. And that's why I think it's imperative. And the other thing is, I think what is it, 765 million, somewhere in that range, maybe eight.
It's 800, yeah, 800 million.
Yeah, it's over $800 million. This is going to mean $100 to $200 per employee, no matter what your claims history is. So that's going to make it in a very fragile situation. And if we want to grow our economy, we want to grow our services, we've got to have as much help for the business community as possible.
Now, switching gears a little bit, this week you held a press conference and you've made some comments about potentially having a special session to deal with police reform, some criminal justice issues, especially with what's going on in Louisville. So what would you want to see passed? I know the governor said this week, maybe in the fall, but he would have to see specific legislation. I know you've been working on a no-knock warrant bill. So what would you want to see passed during a special session?
Well, let's talk about the need. Louisville is almost 20% of our population statewide. It has a mission that goes beyond the geographic boundaries of Jefferson County. With the university that kids come from all over the state, an airport that people come from all around the state, healthcare, entertainment, be it the Yum Center, be it the Kentucky State Fair and Exposition Center. If we don't have a strong Louisville, we are not going to have a strong state. And so we have to help them rebuild two storms, COVID, and then all the civil unrest. And that's why we want to come out and say, what can we do for Louisville to rebuild? Because Lexington hasn't experienced it. Northern Kentucky hasn't experienced it like Louisville has experienced it. So we need to, again, think about the UI, the unemployment insurance, the business climate. We need to think about public safety, because people who are not downtown on their normal, lunch break and afternoon, the happy hour, they're not there. Plus your people who are just there that want to come down for a meal and a drink and entertainment, they're not there either because of the civil unrest. So to calm those individuals who are appropriately protesting, and to deal with those individuals who are using that to do rioting and damaging buildings downtown and enjoying 4th Street Live or other places, we want to do a few things. One is the no-knock warrant. Let's look at escalation, where there is escalation of problems, training that could potentially come in with the police academies and associations to teach better skills training on those, in those situations. We need to look at economic investment in areas to try to create a different business dynamic. And people always complain about businesses, but then they say, well, we want jobs and businesses in our area. That's a perfect example of what we should be doing down on the west end of Louisville, is creating business opportunities. And that truly will change the whole dynamic on the west end of Louisville, and therefore whole. And we've got several ideas how we can do that. You've seen some of the things go on, the discussions about lack of home ownership, how we create tracks for home ownership, but not have situations that you're pricing individuals out of the market because your values are going up to where people are unable to pay their property taxes because they're on limited or fixed incomes. Educational opportunities, healthcare opportunities. There are potentials that we could do some things there to incent that type of opportunity on the West End. So there is a plethora of ideas that could be formulated if there is going to be a special session. It will take thought, and it will take some work, but it is very possible.
Now, is your bill on the no-knock warrants ready to be seen by the governor or to be taken up in a special session? And what's in it?
It could be very close. It's very close. It wouldn't take me long to finish it off. It's a rough draft. But basically, understand this. What happened and what was the the fuse to a powder keg was a search warrant, not an arrest warrant, a search warrant executed at 1 o'clock at night by traditional plainclothes officers. I've done a lot of discussion, and I've been in the practice of law for close to 32 years. Not as much as I used to, but still, I still practice a little bit of law. And to go in at 1 o'clock at night just to seize evidence is bad policing. I want to say this, just because there was some bad policing doesn't mean that the police are bad. So, and so to say you do a no-knock warrant for searches, this would ban that if it is a standalone document. Now, if you're being held hostage, and I don't think you want us knocking on the door saying, we're coming in to rescue you, because if a person took you hostage, they're probably willing to do something to you. So the element of surprise is key. To be able to gather evidence of your capture or other criminal activities by the individuals who hold you, and this is an example, you would need to attach a search warrant to an underlying arrest warrant or the situation, because you want the officers who come in to do this to be able to gather information. They would need a search warrant to do that. So if it is attached to another component of a warrant, be an arrest warrant, something of that nature, it would be permissible in that situation. But as a standalone, no. It couldn't be a standalone tool. Zero, never. And then you need people who are trained and know how to execute that type of warrant in those situations where they're going in unannounced. Surprise is a key tool, that it is highly volatile. They know how to secure and protect all the individuals involved, which means the individuals in the house and the officers themselves. And that takes a lot of training. I know a little bit about this from my time. Prosecutor, also know a little bit about it because that's what my son does in the military, close quarter capture and terrorist intervention. And he talks about it. It's extremely unsafe. And so that's the mechanism of when and how it be used. Then there's process about how you obtain it. You need supervisor sign off. You need to get a judge to sign it. You would have to certify that you've never sought a warrant like this from any other judge and been denied. So there's protocols in place to make sure that it is validly obtained and appropriately executed, but not as a standalone tool.
And that answered my next question, because, you know, there's been a lot of discussions about getting rid of no-knock warrants. And my question was, is there a place for them? And it sounds like, especially like you said, holding someone hostage, that would be one of those situations, but having the training in the certain type of.
Let me say this. Do you remember a few years ago, and maybe 5-6 years ago, there was the threat and potential of a terrorist cell in Bowling Green? Mm-hmm. You don't want to go knock on the door saying, we're coming in to seize potential weapons of mass destruction or biological weapons.
Right.
Because if they're willing, terrorists have no value for anybody's life, including their own. So the element of surprise is a key tool there. So you go through the door unannounced with the appropriate legally obtained documents. One, arrest warrant. Secondly, in conjunction or attached to as part of the procedure, a search warrant. That gives you the ability not only to detain people, but it gives you the ability to go through the house or through the premise or through the building to search and seize evidence or indicia of criminal activity. So yes, it is, but there is really no place, and it would have to be extremely, extremely limited, where it would be a standalone tool by itself. And when you discuss that with people, they say, yeah, we understand that concept.
And in Louisville, I know Mayor Fisher, in his response to the things you had said this week, kind of made a list of things they're doing in Louisville to address some of these issues, including the Breonna's Law that they did with the Louisville Metro Council. But my question is basically, is there anything else like what they're doing in Louisville that should be addressed at the state level as well? Or, you know, this is the time to start talking about more of these criminal justice issues in a lot of ways. We've been talking about substance use disorder and how people end up in prison because of it when they should end up in treatment. So I think that a lot of people are more ready than ever to discuss these issues of criminal justice. So what other issues could and should be addressed either in the special session or in 2021 on those issues?
Well, I think you've touched on it when you say that this whole issue about drug use, when you think about our population, and most experts, Republican, Democrat, would agree that probably a very conservative estimate would be 60% of our prison population has some type of dependency issue. So would it be better to be able to discern and separate basically the wheat from the chaff? When an individual gets in trouble, let's do an assessment. That assessment would determine on nonviolent, non-sexual offenses, should we divert these people to a substance abuse program, or do they need to be incarcerated? What is the best course of conduct to try to get this person, which is the ultimate goal of any penal sections or sanctions, is to try to get the person rehabilitated back on the street, pay your price to society for the crime, but then make you a viable and productive citizen. So that's where I think you'd want to do that assessment to say, all right, Robert Stivers needs to go to this track, get assessed, detoxed, rehab, skills training, and then potential job, which may take a year, versus Robert Stivers needs to go to this track and sit in a jail or a facility for a year with limited or no ability to really deal with my underlying issues. Now, totally different type of assessment if it was a sexual crime or violent crime. But when you start talking about property crimes, drug offenses, I think having that type of option is very viable.
I think you're absolutely right about needing that type of assessment. And I think that we've talked for years about, you know, treatment versus incarceration, the fact that we need more treatment beds and so on and so forth. So under this idea, who would be responsible for conducting those assessments, do you think?
There's a couple of different ways you could go with it. You could do it through an expanded social services, expanded court, the pretrial release officers, or you could contract with entities that have that expertise. Let's people that I know, people I've dealt with, and I want to stop, when you start thinking about Volunteers of America, we're dealing with chemically dependent pregnant women. It's terrible to think that we're fighting this problem in utero now. My gosh. But when you look at the Volunteers of America that have that, or other entities there in Louisville, in Fayette County, an addiction recovery care in Eastern Kentucky that's doing the same things, you could probably work out some type of contracting with them to do the assessment, because then they would know where the immediate beds are available, and not exclusive to them, but be kind of a clearinghouse opportunity. Because I'm going to tell you, I think I'm a decent lawyer and a decent legislator, but it is not my role to go in and assess somebody. I'm not trained to do that. And you need somebody who has that opportunity. And talking to entities like this, they say, look, we've got the people we could put there that upon arrest, we do that assessment. And then we know where the beds are and the appropriate provider, wherever it may be. If it is a young gentleman, a juvenile, if it is a young woman who's pregnant, and where they need to go.
And I think that's a great idea. And I'd love to talk to you more about 2021 issues after the election. So hopefully we'll do an interview then. But in terms of these issues, you guys have a lot to tackle in 2021 with another year of the budget, potentially redistricting, a lot of things. So is this something that you could see in terms of criminal justice reforms in general and dealing with substance use disorder, something that could get done in 2021?
Yes, because there's discussions. I've been having these discussions for over a year now. And look, I want to be critical of the governor's office where I think I should be critical. I will express my gratitude where I think they deserve it. They have reached out. I think I've had discussions with Secretary Noble. The governor has designated a young man that is trying to kind of circulate among legislators to see what their thoughts are. So I think it's very doable in 21. We have to define what it is, but I think they're, you know, and I'll be a little humorous, but that's always kind of bad. I'm not a humorous type of guy or perceived to be, but we have to figure out what it is. And anybody who's been in my office has seen my little it that runs around here. There's a lot of it's that everybody supports. We just don't know what it is. So we need to define those it's and really get a point on the pencil to where we know what we're writing down on the paper. And I think there's a real possibility we can do a lot of those things.
That's great. And these are all extremely important conversations that the state is having right now. So I appreciate you taking the time to talk with me about them today.
Glad to. Anytime.